Is it recording?
It sure is.
All right. Here we are on The Blind Man in Black. I am your host, Brian Snyder. If you like this, subscribe, like, rate, review. If you don't like it, say you hate it. I don't give a shit. Whatever works. So here we are. I'm really excited. I'm here with comedian, podcast, radio host, producer, actor, softball coach, football coach, hockey coach, all the coaches that there are, and everything else. I'm going to learn a lot more. Bryan Erwin, thank you for being here. I
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
having me. It's a pleasure being on the show. It's been a while since we've chatted, as you know. So
Yeah, I should frame it because how we met is you and John Huck invited me on your show, Hollywood Anonymous, and I had a mental health crisis, which you witnessed and heard.
well, yeah, I just think that if I remember correctly, it was just and it's interesting you bring that up, but um, life is a series of conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes some of them catch you off guard, and it was you started going down I don't want to say a rabbit hole because that sounds bad, but you were reflecting on your life. I mean, I don't know if you've, the reason why you were in town, if you want to explain that, it was part of a journey as to where you are today. It was part of that journey. So I kind of look at it like I understood,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you were going through a lot in your life, and when you visited us, it was because you were in town to be to deal with some stuff with respects to your journey, correct?
Yeah. Basically, what happened is I was living in a very remote part of California, basically in the mountains above Fresno, and I was isolating myself because of my disabilities, and I was trying to find out what the fuck am I going to do with my life, and I was waiting for an epiphany, and it was not happening, and then suddenly one day, I remember it very clearly. I was sitting in my chair watching television. I was like looking through one eye and I was like, what the fuck is going on with one eye? And I could see that I clearly had it. Like there was like this blurry spot and it was a cataract. But that happened. And at the same month, like my Bernese mountain dog died. My cat died in the same month. A possible relationship that I could have had slipped away because she started dating somebody else. And I had pushed that off for many years. And then there was just a lot of shit happening. And I was like, I gotta change my life. And I'm like, I'm gonna go to LA and I'm gonna see some friends and try to find what the hell I'm going to do next. And so when I connected with John Huck and I said, hey, I'm going to visit. I think I want to do some stand-up comedy. And he said, all right, come on down. And then he said, you want to do the podcast? And that's how it happened. And I think it was surprising to you. I think I cried at least twice in that, maybe more, but in Hollywood Anonymous. But yeah, it was a journey, but I had a lot of fun when I was down there, and I enjoyed being on the podcast as well. And one of the reasons I wanted to invite you on this is because you had encouraged me to do some radio or podcast, and I was grateful for that, and I always remembered it. So thank you.
Oh yeah, not well. I don't remember doing that, but if I did, you're welcome. I have to learn how to accept a thank you every once in a while. Usually, I'm like, again, Midwestern me. I'm like, oh no, and have some sort of like humility stroke. Oh, somebody said thank you to me. Oh my god. But yeah, no, man. I've always been I've always found that like in my life journey that I had to do a lot of whatever it is that I wanted to accomplish by myself without a lot of help. And that's not me going, oh, boo-hoo. It was just the
Hmm.
reality of where I found myself quite a bit. That doesn't mean that people didn't help me along the way, right?
Hmm.
It's just that early on in my life when I was trying to figure out like what did I want to do? I knew I wanted to do something creative, right? But I didn't quite know where, and I didn't have a lot of mentors or guides or like people were like, here's what you should do. Or like when I would
Hmm.
reach out to somebody, whether it was a radio DJ or a filmmaker or whatever, I wasn't getting like the warm and fuzzies. I wasn't getting any guidance whatsoever. Most of the guidance was don't bother, It's a
Mhm.
horrible business, kid. Take a hike, go sell food.
Right.
But because of that, it changed the way I interacted with people. And I'm a big fan of whenever I hear somebody talk about these are the things that I want to do, I encourage them, even if they're going to fail. I believe it's important to encourage them to give it a shot.
Yeah.
Anything. I say the same thing with people like when they find out that I did stand up and they're like, I've often wanted to do stand up. I go, do it. Like a
Yeah.
lot of stand ups are like, oh, great. Another person wants to do stand up. I'm the exact opposite. I'm like, no, man, if you or woman or person of any whatever choosing, whatever it is, like go for it. Seriously, go for it. Give it a shot. You may only do it once, you may only do it a half a time, depending on how
Yeah.
good or bad it goes, or you may do it for years, but do it. Whatever it is you want to do, give it a shot.
Mm.
It's the American thing, I think, to poo-poo people's dreams, right?
Mhm.
That's not the way. It's not. America's like dream city, right? But it's funny that culturally we're like, you might want to just get a college degree and get the safe job. I mean, really, you sure you want to be pursuing dreams? But yet, that's all. It's like one of those things we put, on the mountaintop. Is that this is the place you can do it? So I'm all about promoting anything. So yeah, I'm sure when you and I talked, I was like, whatever you want, man, go for it.
Well,
Why not?
I appreciated it, and it stayed with me, and I think I thought about it a lot, and it all played into this podcast as well. So, and I thank you. But I want to check in and see how have you been? How you been holding together through this pandemic?
Well, you are a man of a certain age. You look like you're probably not as old as I am, but old enough. But then again, everybody knows the Alice Cooper song "School's Out for Summer," right? The
Right.
classic, right?
Right.
Um, "School's Out Forever." That
Hmm.
song has never applied more than this last year for me during COVID because I have two kids and they have been living with me every day for the last year and a half, including school. So, as we now know, living in California, it seems like things are opening up, which means they're going to go back to physical school in
Right.
fall. So, dude, I cannot tell you, and I love my kids, but I cannot
Yeah.
tell you how excited I am and how many times I want to play that Alice Cooper song in my kids' faces so that they can just, all right, we are out of this house. Okay. Your turd of a teacher named Dad is done. That's enough. I barely survived school myself. So get out of here and never come back to this school.
I can relate. My wife has been doing the remote learning thing with our 6-year-old, and he hates it. He's like, I know, like mom school, and I'm sure you're getting a similar, but not in. They're not probably not saying it like that, but
No, they love it
oh, they
because
did.
I'm like, you guys aren't gonna ask me any questions today, right? You guys are just gonna like go somewhere and be quiet. Hopefully never ask me a question. But my kids are actually, in all fairness to them, they're really good students.
Right.
Their mother is a genius
Hmm.
and they've got a lot of that from her.
Hmm.
They got their work ethics from her. She's a lawyer, so that I only say that because if you know anything about lawyers, they're heavy into research, they're heavy into studying, they
Hmm.
have a really strong work ethic, right? Almost to a fault.
Yeah.
I am none of those things.
Yeah.
I am a C plus. How can I get out of my work today at school guy? So, I'm the
Right.
guy that can teach my kids how to cut corners, not how to be their best in a classroom.
Right. 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 Well, let's start. Let's go back to the psychology of how that all came about. So, you grew up in the Midwest, and what was
Yeah.
that like?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I was born in Illinois, and so a very short window of Illinois. And then I think it's the summer of '77. I think we moved to Wisconsin. And Illinois
Hmm.
and Wisconsin were interesting. Illinois and Wisconsin are kind of like New Zealand and Australia. They don't like each other, and they don't
Oh,
want you to ever refer to them in the like of the other, if that makes any sense. You can't.
really? What's that? What do you think that's about?
Just competitiveness. The
Okay.
Chicago, if you think about it, you've got New York, Chicago, LA, right? So Milwaukee is the true second city, right? It's a smaller city. just an hour and a half outside of like this big metropolitan. Oh, isn't Chicago awesome?
Mm,
You know, Chicago's so cool. Chicago is the Midwest New York, right?
mhm.
So you kind of have this bravado that they believe is coming from the South. And it's a weird dynamic in the fact that most people in Illinois do all their summer vacationing in Wisconsin.
Mm.
And so you got this like, oh, here they come. And they call them fibs, which is effing Illinois bastards. That was the nickname that they had. And so it was always weird for me because obviously I was both, right? I was
Right.
born in Illinois. I'm the youngest of seven. So the majority of my siblings like spent most of their lives in Illinois. I was, I spent the least amount. But
So
I
you
still
were
had
like
my
your
heart.
own Romeo and Juliet.
Sure. That's one way of putting it. Minus all the love and suicide. But yeah, I mean, um yeah, no, it's just an interesting dynamic, but the Midwest itself, looking back on it now, I can romanticize it. It's great. You can pull out of your driveway and there's not a lot of traffic. The people are extremely polite. There's a few of them. We specialize in really nice serial killers, so we will be your best friend and we will also probably murder and eat you. So
Right.
there is that. But no, overall, um, Wisconsin is a great city. It's had its highs and lows as far as like politically how they view things. But depending on the decade. But I mean, it's always going to be relatively conservative. And I think I have very progressive parents, but it's funny when I left Wisconsin, I didn't realize how conservative I was. I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm not one of
Mhm.
those guys. I'm not going to play that game.
Right.
Being
Right.
conservative applies to everything, not just politics. So
Right.
it
Right.
was something that I had to let go of actually when I left that area, because again, I think I made the joke earlier about humility and stuff like that. And I think we as Midwesterners, we keep to ourselves. We're very helpful people, but we
Mhm.
don't branch out a lot. And like when I told people I was moving to LA, it was like, really? Like they thought like it's almost like I said, I'm taking a ship to Mars. We will never see each other again. It's a very different ideology there, put it that
Yeah.
way. But it's nice.
I can relate to it. I lived in upstate New York, and there is that kind of has that similar feeling and similar accents, and so yeah, yeah, I hear you. So let's pause for a second, though. I want to go back. So, what was your childhood like? Well, you said you had progressive parents. What did they do?
Well, my dad was an artist.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he was an artist, but he worked his job. He I used to be a model, a child model for my dad.
Really?
Oh yeah, but it was cheap labor. So let's not kid ourselves. It wasn't because I was beautiful. It was because it was cheap labor. My dad used to work at a studio in downtown Chicago,
Okay.
and they used to do a lot of different stuff. He worked with like George Carlin, people like that, where they would do like ad campaigns and stuff like that. And then they did a lot of food stuff, and that's where I kind of came into play. I did like a lot of like food modeling and stuff like
Did
that.
you meet George Carlin?
I did not. My dad did. My dad went out
Oh,
to, and it was funny. My dad always talks about that story that he met George Carlin before George Carlin became George Carlin. There's two. A lot of people don't realize that Carlin was a more of a clean cut looking comedian before he became like the bearded kind of like hippie-ish Carlin. My dad worked with the first Carlin,
right.
not the guy that eventually became the Carlin that we all know.
Right. Right.
Right. So which I found, fascinating, interesting. But he said he was a super nice guy, and he is. Towards the end of his life, I happened to be at a club in Hermosa Beach and got to meet him, and he is a super nice guy.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. But so anyway, so my dad was an artist, and then he got a job. The reason why we moved to Wisconsin, he got a job at Western Publishing. Western Publishing no longer, I don't think it exists anymore, but back then they were, for most people would know them. They published the little golden books that everybody had when they were growing up, So that's the business that my dad was in. And
Now, what type of artist was he? A visual artist, like painter?
well, he was a drawer and a painter. He's
Uh,
actually, but eventually he got into the business side of it, and he stopped. That's once you get in the business side, you no longer, I mean, he still had the eye for art, and you're still doing the layouts, and you're overseeing all the print plants and stuff like that. But it's just different now. You know, it's,
Yeah.
at that point, it was just different. My dad was a builder. My dad's self-taught piano, which is crazy. My dad wanted to learn how to build cars. So he took one of our cars and he completely disassembled it, laid it all out, and then put it back together.
How did your mom feel about that?
I think my mom was too busy chasing around 7 idiots in the house.
You had 7 brothers and sisters?
7, but we were the Brady Bunch plus 1. I'm the plus 1.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so I think my mom really didn't have time to pay attention to the things that my dad was doing, other than saying, go help your father every once in a while, which he didn't want anybody's help. You know, you never want the reluctant child to come help you. It's like kind of a waste of time. You spend more time trying to explain to them what they need to do versus just leave me alone and I'll deal with my backache later, you know?
Right.
But yeah, my dad, it was notorious for the saw was going off in the garage nonstop. My dad was constantly building stuff and creating stuff. And it was really fun. You know, I used to joke that my dad was, you know, we grew up with Boy Scouts, in the Boy Scouts. And my dad, you know, with the Boy Scouts, they always did all these events like the Pinewood Derby, where they basically gave you projects that you're supposed to do with your parents, specifically with the Boy Scouts, you know, with your dad. And one of them was they gave us a bunch of basically trash, like beer cans and nails and wood. And they're like, make something out of this. And my dad was like, okay. And of course, my dad like made this amazing looking like robot guy out of everything, right?
Right.
And I'll never forget, because I think this was the end of us doing the Boy Scouts. We took it in and they disqualified us because they were like, you clearly cheated. No one can be this good. My dad was like furious.
What?
You call me a cheater? You know?
Wow.
And I used to have the world's my favorite joke I ever told on stage was derivative of that story that I just told you. And it only succeeded once, but I never gave up on the joke and I never got to laugh again. But the way I changed the joke was I said that my dad got all that stuff, the beer can, the wood, the nails. And I said that we were disqualified for cheating. But the good thing is the dog lived for another 14 years. And no one ever laughed at that joke. I'm like, but my dad made a dog.
Right.
Anyone? No one? Okay, never mind. I love the joke.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I like it.
But yeah, that's that. My life was a lot of being the youngest. I think I was kind of left alone a lot more. And I'm kind of like probably your first generation babied kid, if you will, because I think my parents were just exhausted by number 7. Like number 1 probably got schooled a lot more, right? As a child, number 7. They're like, I can't deal with this anymore.
Right.
They don't even bother, right?
Right.
I was a little bit more feral, which, you know, I grew up in neighborhoods, and in my neighborhood, there was like a ton of kids my age, and we just ran amok. You know, sometimes we did good things, sometimes we did bad things. We spent most of our time, to be honest with you, playing baseball. There was a park down the street. We played baseball because there was no video games or anything when I was growing up. We played baseball like, you know, 10 hours a day until it was dark, and we just got hungry and went home, you know?
So you probably got pretty good at it, I'm assuming.
I was, and then I got really bad at it by the time I got to high school. Like there's always that commitment thing. I was, you know, I realize now when I look back on my life, I'm like, I clearly wanted to be an entertainer. I had this strong love of sports, and I had this strong love of wanting to entertain people. The problem is those two things don't, the physical part of that, of baseball or football or any sport, like if you're really, really into it, those two don't go together. Like you have to be like all in if you want to be a really good athlete, right? You can't be like an okay athlete that tells amazing jokes. No one cares.
Right. So what did your mom do?
My mom was, for the most part, my mom was the stay-at-home mom. She did work at the same company as my dad for a while, and she took jobs on and off. My mom is also extremely creative as well. I've seen some of her work. She knows how to paint and draw and all that kind of stuff. So we had our parents were both very, very creative people. But yeah, I mean, when you have 7 kids, it was all about family. And it's funny, again, a kid's perspective on life versus my perspective once I had my first child, it's all of a sudden you kind of have this epiphany. You're like, oh, that's what my parents were all about. Like all of a sudden, like it all starts making sense, right? Because your selfish journey is about to have the greatest challenge in life, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is like, hello, I just made someone far more selfish than me. So good luck, everybody. You just won the selfish lottery. And I remember calling my mom after I had my first kid, and I was like, how do you, and I was already stressed out after like 3 months, just so lame. And I was like, how do you do this? And she was like so calm. And she's like, you know what? Because I was like, you had 7, you nuts. And she's like, no, I loved it. I loved it. Even the hard stuff. She's like, I loved having kids. Your father and I loved having a family. We wanted to be parents and we embraced it. And that's it. And I was like, anything else? She's like, no, it's that simple. Like if you embrace it, and yeah, it's gonna, life is shitty. You know what I mean? Like in general, it's gonna toss crap at you all the time. You know, it's not perfect, but you can embrace the positive moments, and that's what outweighs all the other crud that you're forced to deal with, right?
Right.
That's what my mom was basically saying.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. So, what do your siblings do now? What are they up to?
Well, I don't know any of them anymore.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
I've disowned every single one. No, I'm just kidding. So I'll go backwards. My closest brother is a retired police officer in Milwaukee. He now works for Marquette University.
Okay.
My sister, my sister works in law. Another one of my sister works in the medical field. Another one of my sister works in the real estate. I have a brother that's a nuclear physicist, and
Holy shit.
I have another brother that I think works in the car business, but I don't have any relationship with him. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
So I don't really know.
So
But there's life. When you have a
you're
litter.
you're the only one in entertainment.
Yeah, my dad was a song and dance man, if you will. When he was growing up, he used to do plays and stuff like that. And I think that's obviously where I got it. My dad loved vaudeville. He had all his old records and stuff like that. My dad, one of my uncles was in radio, and my dad used to go. They used to tell these amazing stories growing up in Chicago. You know, a lot of people don't realize that Chicago was the original Hollywood. It wasn't until all of a sudden they realized that there's consistently perfect weather on the West Coast. All of a sudden they're like, what are we doing here in Chicago? Right?
Yeah.
Where like the weather's inconsistent, and then they took off. So a lot of filmmaking started in Chicago. So you know, my dad would tell me stories about you know, his, or from his, you know, mother and father and stuff like that, seeing a lot of filming happening around them way back in the early 1900s, right? But they used to travel. They used to get on the train back when kids could do whatever they wanted. No, and kids can't do anything now, but like they used to get on the train and take it to downtown Chicago and go sit in the audience of like radio programs back then were like done in front of live audiences.
Yeah.
Like this is way before like television and stuff, right? Radio was what we basically, radio then is how fascinated we are with the internet now, right? Like that's what it is, right? And so they used to do all that kind of stuff. So he was always fascinated with that. And I think I clearly got that part of it from my father.
So when did the performance begin? Like when did that all start?
Well, so I remember when I was growing up, like so many other kids, I would, first time I ever saw the Tonight Show and a stand-up comedian came on there, I immediately became fascinated with that. I can't.
Do you remember who it was?
I don't. But I do know that I was fascinated with the idea of what that was. That idea of storytelling. And then, you know, as the years went on, and as I got older, like in high school, A&E used to have a lot of stand-up on. They had the evening at the Improv.
I remember that.
Caroline's comedy, and they were back to back. But a lot of times, I hope my mom doesn't watch this. I don't want to get in trouble. But a lot of times, those, for whatever reason, those shows were on during school hours. So I would fake sick a lot. to stay
Right.
home so I could watch those shows because again, God, I didn't realize how much the world has changed. I didn't have a way to record it. So it's like you had
Yeah.
to watch it live or you missed it. It was that
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah. I did the same thing. I faked being sick too. Yeah.
Who
So
didn't,
I
right? I mean,
yeah.
but anyway, yeah, so I started watching that and I started becoming more and more fascinated, but simultaneously I was really in high school, I really started to get into music.
Mhm.
Really started to get into, like, I met the Salazar family, this family that was from Argentina, and I was a big soccer player, baseball player in high school, and so the Salazar soccer family, Mauricio, became one of my best friends, and all of us, they were all about the new wave and the post-punk movement and all that kind of stuff. So they introduced me to all this music, and I
Mhm.
got really into that, and that became an obsession of mine as well. So I knew that I wanted to get into television, radio, or mass media of some sort.
Mhm.
Um, and so I started becoming fascinated with working in radio as well, and
Mhm.
and kind of shelved the dream of stand up. The stand up came back after I started doing radio.
Okay.
Because when I started doing radio, they pay you, I was a morning drive DJ and afternoon drive DJ in Milwaukee, and they would pay you to go to these live events.
Mhm.
Really, if you think about it, you're working the mic, baby. You're just
Yeah.
working the mic,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
when they would send you these bar gigs and you got to work it and you got to entertain.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when all of a sudden I was like, I really should just do this. But I
Mhm.
don't know how it was for you, but I struggled with that decision. It's a very hard decision to cross over. At least for me, it was,
Mhm.
because even when I was doing it under the guise of radio, it was my job, right? I was being
Yeah.
paid in that moment to do something. So I had a purpose. But when you actually want to do stand-up comedy, you got to go knock on some comedy club's door or whatever,
Yeah.
or go to a bar and sign up on a list. And you have to say to them, hello, I'm arrogant as fuck. And I think I should be on stage right now entertaining the world. So if
Right.
you wouldn't mind giving me a minute and a half of your stage time, that would be great. Right? Like it's that moment, and I struggled with that for a really long time before I actually took the stage. But eventually I used my power of radio and being on air to get on stage.
What was the first time like when you first did your first show on the radio?
For radio,
Yeah.
well, it varies because I started in college radio. I was at a very well-known radio station in Milwaukee called WMSE. It was a Milwaukee School of Engineering radio station,
Mhm.
and it was alternative. And I was doing that in the middle of the night, and I was kind of a goof.
Mhm.
Um, it's always weird when you crack the mic because you're talking to the void. And now
Yeah.
it's easy for me. It's a little bit different with podcasting because at least it always feels like you have somebody else you're talking to, unless
Mhm.
you're doing this by yourself. But my actual first commercial radio gig was at Light 97, continuous live favorites, coming up 40 minutes of live favorites, including Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You. So the first time I cracked the mic, it was like in the middle of the night. It's really dark in these studios. You are by yourself. You're scared to death that you're going to screw up because there's this weird moment when you hit the button to basically start talking.
Yeah.
There's one moment you're like, thousands of people are tuning into me right now. What if my voice cracks? I'm going to sound like an idiot. And
Right.
the funny thing is, no one cares. Most listeners are extremely passive. It's not like all of a sudden I was Howard Stern and
Right.
I mattered, right?
Right.
But it was weird. It was the hardest thing I think about radio was trying to talk to the void.
Mhm.
Talk by yourself into a microphone and tell yourself it's okay. There are people out there. Because
Yeah.
it's weird because no one's reacting back to you,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you get over it.
Right. Right. Did you have callers as well call in and
Oh my God, late night callers are the best. They
yeah.
keep you awake. They're all out of their minds. They're all out of their minds. And then eventually, you get bored and you realize there's like the board itself will have like 6 lines. And I didn't really get this. Light 97 was a little bit different because it was like, I don't know who would be listening to light favorites at 3 o'clock in the morning, except if you're trying to go to sleep, right? Or, like overnight security, it's just stuck on the radio that's playing inside the mall or whatever. But
Right.
when I went to when I worked at other stations like 93 QFM, which is a rock station, and then LUM, which was the alternative station. I mean, those phone lines lit up all the time because you have all these overnight people, both people just at home and then people just working that just want to talk.
Right.
And I mean, that in itself could have been its own fun talk show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just talking to those people, because they are colorful folk.
Yeah. Yeah. So, did you have any interesting experience where somebody called in drunk, or like you had to like bleep them or anything like that?
No, because you don't. The nice thing about radio is that, well, two things. One, you don't put anybody on the air live ever, and if you
Right.
do, there's always a 5 to 10 second delay, so you have a way to get rid of them.
Right. Right.
So, by the time it had evolved, you could actually just start recording conversations. So if you wanted to put it on there, you could actually record it and edit it, and then put it on, to kind of deal with it. So, no, that kind of stuff never really happened. There, one of the guys that I used to work with, we fell out of favor with each other, and he did try to sabotage me by having a bunch of people call the radio station during a contest, a live on-air contest, and just kind of like, promote his radio station. He went to work for the competing radio station and stuff like
Oh,
that,
so he
and
Baba
tried to make a
Booey you?
fool of me on the air.
Yeah.
And just stupid stuff like that, but nothing. It's so funny. He just recently reached out to me, apologized, and I was like, dude, it's good. It's all good, man. You're just a bunch of young knuckleheads, man. You didn't. I have I don't know how you are, but I have a very small list of unredeemable things.
Right.
Rape, murder, pedophilia. Like it's a pretty, that those are unredeemable. You know what I mean? The rest of
Right.
it, like, say sorry, I called you a poo-poo head, in the fourth grade. It's okay.
Right.
It's gonna be okay.
But it's interesting though that how people carry the weight of something like that over the years,
Look, I've done it. I
Yeah.
mean, to this day, I there I think about this one moment that I had where this guy had got paralyzed by doing jello wrestling or some jello slide or something in college, right? He got paralyzed. And the radio
Jesus.
station that I was working at was doing a promotion with REM at
Hmm.
their peak of it. And they had reached out to us and asked if they could get tickets and a meet and greet for this guy, for REM. And I couldn't do it. I said I couldn't do it. He ended up getting it through the promoter.
Hmm.
And Michael Stipe is like very clear about, at least back then, is very clear, very shy guy, very clear. Like you could do the meet and greet, but like, and he walked around and said hi to everybody, but they said absolutely no pictures, right?
Yeah.
And this just goes to show you like the little things in life that you carry with you forever.
Hmm.
So the guy was there, that was in a wheelchair, and Michael Stipe took a photograph with him, right?
Hmm.
And for some reason, I got so excited. I asked them, the people that I didn't get the tickets to, the guy in the wheelchair, that if anybody earned a photograph with Michael Stipe, it was him. And all of a sudden I'm like, can you guys take a picture of me with Michael Stipe? And they're like, no. And all of a sudden, this wave of immediate guilt came over me of like, why am I asking a guy whose whole life has changed? I turned it into a me moment. Does that make sense?
Right.
And for years, I felt horrible about that moment, and I couldn't let it go. I was like, why would you do that?
Hmm.
Why would you do that? And I'm sure for them, most likely, they moved on a long time ago, if not even in the moment. I didn't let go of it. So I totally understand people not letting go of things.
Yeah. 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 So, so how did this, so how long were you in radio?
Feels like for a long time, but I would say from 91 to 99.
So you must have met so many celebrities and musicians. I mean, you mentioned REM. Who else did you interview?
Well, it would have been the 90s. It would have been it was not, so most of it came 94 on, and that would have been the whole, basically what K-Rock is
Mhm.
in LA or Q101 in Chicago. So it was the alternative scene in '94. So some of these people may have forgot about, but like Soul Asylum, Hootie and the Blowfish. Did not get to meet Pearl Jam. Desperately wanted to, but I got great tickets to the show.
Right. Right.
That was the perk, right? Always got
Yeah.
great tickets. Chris
Yeah.
Isaac, Gavin Rossdale from Bush. One of my favorite bands when I was in college was Toad the Wet Sprocket. I was able to meet them, so that was
Okay.
exciting. Alanis Morissette, Jewel. Those are the ones right off the top of my head that I can think of right now. I'm sure there was many more. Matthew Sweet.
So what was the most memorable encounter you had in radio?
Son of a bitch. Most memorable encounter. Okay, I actually just told this story. Speaking of embarrassing moments, I'll give you a good one and a bad one.
Okay.
So going when you're young, you're arrogant. Let's not kid. Let's just be honest. Especially men.
Yeah.
Men are so arrogant when they're young because we think we got it all figured out by age 24.
Right.
At least I did. I'm sorry. I won't lump everybody else. Let me just talk about me.
Okay.
I was arrogant and I was driven, and I really wanted to succeed in radio, and I wanted to prove to everybody that I knew what I was doing. That's just who I was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was the promotions director at this radio station at the peak of alternative radio in the mid 90s. Mm-hmm. So every big band was coming through, and I was the king of promotions, right? Like if you were an alternative band, you came through, and I helped put the promotions together for the clubs. And we promoted this event for a social Sonic Youth, which is classic. I mean, dude, if you're like into alternative music, like Sonic Youth is like up there, you know, like now I guess they'd be considered the grand poobahs of that kind of music. And I'll never forget, like I was out front and somebody came and said, you know, the big thing when you promote a radio is you get to introduce the bands. Mm-hmm. So you kind of put your stink on it, right? Like, hey, welcome to the show. It's our show. The only reason why they're here is because we brought them here. Aren't we awesome? Right? Like that was kind of the whole concept of stage introductions. Right. So somebody comes out and says, they're not going to let you do it. And I'm like, what? And I like got all pissed off. I'm like, nobody's going to tell me I can't do a stage introduction. I did all the work. And I go in and I'm like I'm dropping F-bombs and swearing at the promoter and going nuts. And it's so funny. He goes, well, if you got such a big problem with it, why don't you tell them? Because they're all standing right behind you. And I was like, oh. And I'll never forget, like Kim Gordon just kind of looked at me, and then the other guy, I forget the guitarist, but he just was like, not gonna happen, dude. And I was like, fair enough, and just kind of walked away. It's like so stupid, and just got out of there. Right. But one of the most favorite things I got to do, one of the most memorable things I got to do was I was a part of putting this thing together called the New Rock Fest, and it was a massive major festival that had a headliner stage, and I was able to, thanks to the at the time, who was a DJ with me at the radio station, I was able to get the Violent Femmes to headline the event. Now, the reason why that's important is because the Violent Femmes are from Milwaukee. And if you were to ask any bands in the mid 90s who was one of their greatest influences, they all would have said the Violent Femmes. Mm-hmm. But the Femmes at that time had a beef with Milwaukee and Milwaukee radio, because the Femmes had an extremely huge and successful album in the late 80s. And Milwaukee kind of turned a blind eye to them. So they were pissed and they refused to perform in Milwaukee anymore. Mm-hmm. So I pulled the rabbit out of the hat, and I got them not only to come back, but made it like this huge big to do, right? Mm-hmm. And so they did let me introduce them on stage, but they were like, you have to go out 3 minutes before we come on stage. You can't introduce us and then we'll come. They negotiated with me of like when I could do it and how far. But I will tell you, man, I didn't care, because taking the stage in front of 24,000 screaming people was the most bizarre, but also like and they didn't even care about me, right?
Right.
But I said the word violent femmes, and I felt the warmest wave of energy hit me from 24,000 people. And I was like, wow, holy crap. You understand why musicians strive. They live for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dude, it's unreal. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I was listening to Paul McCartney sing "Hey Jude" at like Central Park, and just listening to him interact with that many people. I was like, that's must be an incredibly powerful experience, like having that interaction with that many people.
Oh my God. I mean, I'll never forget it. I mean, even when telling you the story, I can still feel the wave hit me. It's a really weird connection, right? Because that's that weird connection of fans, because
Yeah,
you don't know them, but they know you. They're so intimately connected to you because of their music, because
yeah,
music does really, it gets to the soul of humans when you connect. So it's weird. I mean, weird in a good way, meaning that like I totally get it in that moment. And it wasn't even meant for me. I intercepted the love. I was like,
right.
oh, even this intercepted love is pretty sweet.
Yeah, yeah. I think Steve Martin, he when he was at the height of his stand-up career, he was playing the crowds like that, and I can imagine that must have been an insane like experience.
Yeah. Did you read his
Yeah, I just
book?
did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting. He actually didn't seem to be a big fan of it.
right.
He appreciated it, right? But he said it's really hard, and I totally understand this.
Yeah,
Doing stand up, he said it was really hard to do stand up because there's a delay.
yeah,
And that's interesting when you think about it. That makes sense, right? Because stand up to me is it is an intimate art form,
yeah,
right? Like it plays best when you're in an intimate setting. And intimacy can be as many as 300 people, but
yeah,
that's not 24,000, right?
yeah,
That's a huge difference.
yeah, yeah. So 99, you left radio, right?
Well, radio told me to leave. Yes.
Oh, what is there a story behind that?
Yeah, unfortunately. Um, but in radio you get fired a lot, and I
Yeah.
did. And I was brought in and out during my journey, but my final mistake, my final nail in my radio coffin was I had started to get into stand up. So I
Mm,
started getting cocky with stand up, and one of my best friends to this day is a comedian who likes to push buttons, and he likes to go way to the dark side. He likes, and I made the mistake of letting him come on the air without getting clearance.
right.
And he made an extremely inappropriate joke on the air, and I was fired the next day.
Oh,
But,
wow.
but we stayed best friends. Oh, and my wife left me.
Oh,
And
geez.
again, all fine, all
Mm.
fine. And so
Like in the same day?
no. She actually, I think my marriage was already kind of crumbling at that point anyway.
Okay.
She was, anytime, just this is a heads up for anybody. Anytime your significant other says that they want to take a vacation without you, it's probably about to end. No one wants to. No one's like, you know what? I really want to go to Europe. You'd be like, we should. You'd be like, no, just me, just me. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, sure. That totally makes sense. Yeah, no, by the time she got back, I mean, she got back, I had lost my job. Like, I mean, it's like boom, 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 and scene, right? So
Right.
it was what it was. But you know what? We live life in a series of acts, and
Mhm,
that was act one.
mhm.
And when I look back on it now, that was exactly what was supposed to happen,
Right.
for better or worse.
Now, you mentioned stand-up comedy. So how did that begin? Like, how did that start? So you're doing radio, and were you doing open mics at the same time?
Nah, I kind of cheated with that. I used the radio to kind of cheat my way in. So there was Stooges was a comedy club that was in town,
Hmm.
and they were receptive to my idea. This is the one thing I will tell you that I miss. This is what I miss, because you can't get it back. You can only do it once.
Yeah.
I miss sneaking into comedy clubs and sitting in the back and watching, because I had never done it before. So I was watching it from the point of view of can I do this? What is this all about? You know, and I get the warm and fuzzies thinking about that because I love comedy clubs and I like the darkness of being able to sit in the back and watch people, do their job, sometimes well, sometimes not so well, sometimes trying to work on a bit and all that stuff. Loved it, fascinated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So then all of a sudden I get this idea. I was like, well, I am on the air. Why don't I just have a comedy contest? Why don't I just see if the comedy club will let me come down and host an open mic? And
Mm-hmm.
they did. And I started doing stand up there through that. And the first time I did it, I actually did, really well. And
So
the second time I did
you
it,
Chappelled it.
well, I got lucky.
Right.
I think years of being in radio builds up the confidence. So being on stage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having to, use a microphone and like it wasn't that part of it was not that foreign to me because of where I had come from. Right.
Yeah.
So there was that. But the funny thing is, they put for the night that I did it, Frank Caliendo, who's from Milwaukee, he happened to be in town.
Mm-hmm.
And he went up right before me and crushed. So the fact that, and as you know, with stand up, you never want somebody to crush right before you. It's like, especially your first time going up, is like, and here's somebody that everybody knows. And now this guy, you know what I mean? Like,
but you did well.
I did well. And that was the beginning of my friendship with Caliendo, actually, because he watched and he was like, oh, good job. And, because he helped me a lot in early in my career in Milwaukee when I first got started. My second time did not go as well.
Yeah.
And I think my third or fourth time was when I finally realized my wife was definitely probably going to leave me eventually, because I finally got her to go. I think she was kind of over me and all my like crazy things that I wanted to do.
Right.
When we first met, I wasn't even in radio. I was like a food broker, like sales guy. I was going to live, I was no normal life. Right. And then all of a sudden I'm a radio guy, then I'm a fired radio guy, then I'm a radio guy. No, I'm not a radio guy. I was a band manager. I forgot about that whole thing. I used to manage bands in between.
Right.
I've done way too many things. So I used to manage bands, Citizen King, the Guffs. And so like, it was like, did all this stuff. And then I'll never forget, like she was sat like 4 or 5 rows back and I'm on stage and I can see her and she's just got her arms crossed. Like, I am not going on this journey with you, dude. This is not happening. And I should have known right there. Like, this relationship was not going to work out. And I want to be honest with you. I don't blame her for anything that I forced her to have to do to get rid of me, to shake my stank off of her. She did the right thing by getting rid of me. She did.
So what did you do? Well, I mean, so you did a few stand-up, shows, and then what happened?
Well, so when you do, like I was fortunate, like in Wisconsin, if you do a couple open, there were some other, I did some other open mics around, but the goal was to establish a relationship with a club. And if you did well enough, the club would allow you'd be able to MC.
Right.
So you get to MC a weekend. And that's basically the next step was, Caliendo put in a good word for me after seeing me do it a couple times. And he saw that I was putting in the work, because I was. I mean, when I really wanted to get into stand-up, I really started doing it quite a bit. And obviously, it made a huge difference, having my wife having left me at that point, having radio having left me at that point, like basically having lost my job, lost my wife. I had the time, right? And
the material.
And the material, exactly. You kind of have to have some shit happen to you, right? Though I didn't do any of that back then. Right. I didn't talk about my personal life at all.
Okay.
It was.
So what was the material like in the early days?
You're just trying to tell jokes. You're just trying to be funny. All observational stuff.
Right.
Somewhere around, it's probably in a box. I used to carry a coffee mug around that had all my jokes taped to on the backside, because I used the coffee mug as like a bad prop as well, and so I used it kind of as a cheater.
Right.
It was just all silly, jokes. But there were so many comedy clubs around that I started getting a lot of work. I was actually working almost every weekend as an MC. And you get a lot, if you care, you can get a lot better very quick. Now, when I say a lot better,
Mhm.
better for then, better for 1999. Because I look back at it now, I'm like, ooh, I sucked, but I was good enough,
Mhm.
right, to do what I did. But man, I'll tell you, once my life started heading down that path,
Mhm.
I loved it. I loved
Yeah.
every second of it. I loved it, no matter how good or bad it was. I loved the community of stand-ups. We were just a bunch of misfits, we were just a bunch of mutts trying to find our way in life, and I loved it. I loved it. It was a great support group of people. To this day, I look back and I'm like, man, that was awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you get to LA?
Well, I got to a point where I was always fascinated with Los Angeles, obviously going back to, we talked about when I was a kid, whether it was watching movies, or television shows or anything that was LA based, or just, the entertainment business in general. Obviously, that's where you go, right? It's
Mhm.
either New York or LA, but everything that I watched seemed to be. I went to school for filmmaking. I've like cut out large portions of my life, but I went to University of Wisconsin Milwaukee for film.
Uh-huh.
Eventually, got kicked out of film school and then got into mass
Wait a
communication.
minute. What did you do?
Well, Wisconsin, they're an avant garde film school,
Okay.
which is fine because it teaches you other approaches to making films.
Right.
I got kicked out because I kept making narratives.
Okay.
And they're like, hey, dude, we're an avant garde film school. Stop making narratives. And I wanted to make narratives, so they kicked me out.
Okay. So
But
that's
yeah, so
interesting. Yeah, you rebelled with against avant-gardeness. That's interesting.
right. By being as mainstream as possible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
By trying to tell a story the traditional way. But I enjoyed that as well. And I do, when I look back on it now, even though I got kicked out, I did learn a lot, through film theory and stuff like that. And I learned to love to edit. And that was back when you were still using film and stuff like that. So I got enough out of it. I did it for the 2 years that I was in film school. I enjoyed it, but I ended up getting a communications degree because I just wanted to graduate and I hated school at that point. And that's
Right.
kind of what shifted me into kind of looking into radio. Radio got me into band management. Band management eventually got me back into radio, and then everything got me fired. And then I'm in radio, and then I'm in, stand up. So that was kind of like
Mhm.
all those little worlds. And, the nice thing about band management is I was a tour manager. So I got a taste of life on the road, in a
S-
van, driving
So
all over the place.
that must have been wild, right? I mean, coke and hookers and all
No,
that. No?
no, the 90s, man. It was the 90s.
Right.
It was all about, no one, no, it wasn't the hardcore partying anymore. It was actually
Right.
it was starting to shift towards, it wasn't that people didn't party, but it
Right.
was nothing like that Motley Crue movie that you saw on Netflix. I mean, it was
Right.
like, it was a completely different world. People were really into image at that point. Cause you think about it, 94, I mean, MTV was peaking, right?
Yeah.
And they were influencing and they were peaking, and the world was changing a lot. So image was becoming like the thing. And so you really didn't want to be seen as like the loser, drug addict, drunk guy. I mean, sure, did they exist? Absolutely. But not in the circles that I was in. The circles I was in, these guys really wanted, they weren't straight and narrow, but they weren't out of their minds,
Mhm.
and neither were the bands that we would perform with wherever we were. I mean, it was pretty chill.
Right.
It was interesting. I mean, people always ask me what it was like. It's like, well, if you asked me that question in Dayton, Ohio, it wasn't great. If you asked me that question when I'm in Boulder, Colorado, it was amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it just depends on where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. So did anything happen that was memorable when you're on the road that was wild or weird or
There was nothing super crazy. The two bands that I managed, one, the Guffs were on Atlantic Records, and that was a little bit trickier because the album, it never took. So we never got out of the van phase, and it was really hard for the band, because you get really excited. You sign to a record label, you're going out on the road, you're going to be famous, like everything's going to hit, you're going to have a #1 record, and you're going to hear your song over radio. And it didn't happen. That's life. We did start our tour at the exact same time as a little known band named Matchbox 20. And their song did take, and their
Right.
song did become a hit. And we noticed as we were going city to city that more and more people, it was interesting to watch how it actually works.
Mm-hmm.
It just unfortunately didn't happen to us. But yeah, I mean, it got to the point where all of a sudden Matchbox 20 was gone because Rob Thomas needed to be flown everywhere
Mm-hmm.
because it was a #1 song. You know,
Yeah.
it was huge. The other band that I worked with, Citizen King, they had a top 40 hit called Better Days, but I
Right.
worked with them leading up to getting their record deal, and that was different because we were being flown everywhere. I mean, they were like, everyone was trying to sign them.
Yeah.
With a lot of showcase shows from LA to New York to Chicago, and that was fun because it was just different because everyone rolled out the red carpet for you, you know,
Right.
and you kind of got to go everywhere. And so that was a little bit of a different experience. So I had both. I had the low end drive around the van in the middle of nowhere, you know, in Alabama, and then I had the flying back and forth at the coast while everybody wined and dined you until you decided who, you know, you were going to go with.
Right.
But it was great. It was they were all great experiences. I've told this story before, and again, because apparently everything I do in life is awkward. I was with the Guffs. We were at Atlantic Records in New York City. We were in the A&R rep's office. He left. I sat down in his chair. The band was sitting across from me, and we were just talking to kill time while he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
This guy walks past, and he used to be a radio rep. And so we knew each other from radio.
Mm-hmm.
And we started talking, and I said, hey man, what are you doing here? He goes, well, I'm repping this new artist named Kid Rock. And so Kid Rock was with him. And also with Kid Rock was his MC Josie. I don't know if you remember, Kid Rock had Josie was smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, I don't know what the proper term is these days.
You mean a little person?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't know. Because again, nobody knew who Kid Rock was. He had just signed. And so Kid Rock came in with Josie, and they sat across from me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to be very clear when I tell this story. Josie, and you can Google this for yourself. Google Josie at about, like, if not for you, you'll understand in the story. But anybody that doesn't believe me, just Google Josie in the mid-90s. Anyway,
okay.
Point is this: he looked young. So I just want to point that out before I tell you what happened. Okay. So
I can see where this is going. Go ahead.
You were having a conversation. He never said a word. He just sat there and talked to Kid Rock for a little bit. And then he's like, all right, we got to go. And I was like, cool. He gets up. I shake Kid Rock's hand. I lean over and I pat Josie on top of the head. And I say, it was nice to meet you too, little fella. And dude, he got so angry. He went, this is going to sound, I mean, look, I'm stupid. I thought he was like 8 years old.
Right.
It was weird because when he got angry, I was like, well, he looks a lot older when he's angry. Why is that kid such a jerk? And like everybody else in the room was mortified, right? Leave, the band closes the door and they're like, what the dude? Why would you? I'm like, what? They're like, he's like 30 years old. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know. I thought he was just a douchebag little kid. I thought he was Kid Rock's little brother. I didn't know. Right. Never lived that one down.
Yeah, the disability community would be very upset with you.
They should be. They should be. And I just didn't know, you know. But here's the thing. It turns out you shouldn't do that to anybody. Right. It's a condescending move. Really, think about it. Right? It kind of is. Even if it is a kid, it's kind of condescending. You're letting them know where they are, right, in the pecking order by doing that. Anytime you take somebody by the top of their head, it's kind of a pecking order move. So yes, they should be pissed off. I know.
So have you done it since?
I do it to kids all the time.
So what happened? What happened? So you did some band management, and then where did you go from there?
Right. So the only reason why I bring that up is because one of my best friends who managed bands with me, he was actually the head manager of Citizen King.
Mhm.
And as I was going through my divorce, he moved out to LA.
Mhm.
And that kind of stimulated me going, you know what? I don't have anything left here in Wisconsin. I was 30 years old at the time.
Mhm.
And I kind of was looking at like, what was my life going to look like in Wisconsin?
Mhm.
And I didn't want to be this is going to sound weird getting into stand up, but I didn't want to tour because I
Mhm.
had already done that with bands.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to do it again. I didn't want to be all over the road. So I was like, I just want to go to LA regardless. I want a clean slate. I want to try something new. I've always been fascinated with LA. I don't have anything holding me back,
Mhm.
you know. And I just left. I've told my family and my closest friends. I was like, because my theory was if you're gonna make a change in your life, you have to go around and tell everybody a lot and very loudly. Because
Mhm.
otherwise you'll back out. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to put yourself on embarrassment watch so that
Mhm.
if you back out, it's kind of embarrassing, right?
Yeah.
And a couple of friends were supportive, a lot of people were concerned, but my I remember talking to my mom, and she was, my mom really wanted my marriage to work out. So her big thing was like, well, don't leave because you never know. And I'm like, I finally told her, I'm like, it's not gonna happen. The marriage is not coming back. So at that point, because I'm very close with my parents, and it was really hard for me to move
Mhm.
that far. It was gonna be a hard decision for me to move that far away from my parents.
Yeah.
And so my parents gave me the blessing. They're like, it's your life. Yeah, go for it.
Mm.
If the marriage is never going to work out, go for it. Go live your life. We love it. And that was it. And I was like, all right, I'm out. And in
Now,
May of March of 2000, after the world did not come to an end when it went to 0-0, I packed up and headed out with some of my new comedian friends.
so the intention, even though you didn't want to tour, go on the road, you were still thinking you want to go into comedy at that point.
Yeah, because stand up, as because you performed in LA, it's just different. You're
Yeah.
not it's not traditional MC feature headliner, it's showcase sets. So
Yeah.
now it's all about the hustle of how many gigs you can get per week to fine tune your material.
Yeah.
And in LA, just like New York to an extent, I can't say for sure because I never performed in New York, but you're trying to get on TV. We're trying to get to that next level. A lot of people showcase specifically hoping that someone more successful is around and they will take you on the road with them. My
Mhm.
big thing was I wanted to still make film and television. I wanted
Mhm.
to know everything about Hollywood. I wanted to know the ins and outs of everything in Hollywood. I was never something about me. I've never just wanted to be like a DJ or
Mhm.
just a band manager. I wanted to know it all. I wanted to know everything about the business that I was in. And I wanted to roll my sleeves up and be a part of every piece of it, you know.
Mhm.
Obviously, I was still interested in filmmaking because I went to school for that. So, filmmaking, writing, but stand up was your way to meet people. That was going to be my social circle because the only person I knew two people out here, and neither
Mhm.
one of them were in stand up. So, I was going to have to go meet strangers, but I was lucky. My sister lived in San Diego at the time. I
Mhm.
landed in San Diego. I immediately went to the Comedy Store in La Jolla. They happened to be having a showcase night. I went up. I did really well. The manager at the time was like, "You can come back here every week, on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And if you want a job being a door guy," and I was like, "Rock and roll, baby." And I mean, it happened like that. And that was
Wow.
great. I was really, so even though I was going to LA, I had a soft landing for
Mhm.
about 3 months in San Diego
Mhm.
and La Jolla. Kind of got my bearings straight at the Comedy Store in La Jolla. Then I went up and started doing, then I went up and it was time to do stand up in LA. And that's when I got scared. When I
Really?
moved,
How so?
well, so, when I finally was like, okay, I didn't move to California to live in San Diego. You got to, dude, you got to move to Los Angeles. You got to do this. But once I do that, everybody, all my friends and everybody that I started making, friends that I started making at the Comedy Store in La Jolla, they're all from San Diego. They're not LA comics. They didn't go to LA. So
Yeah.
when I got up there, I was by myself, and fortunately, one of my friends used to work at the Improv, and he knew some people.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, I know this girl, she does a little bit of stand up. There's this one place called Bar Azor in Culver City. You should go over there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, man. Like I was like, yeah, right? Like everything full speed. I'm here. Let's do this, right? I
Mm-hmm.
remember pulling up that night to the bar and I just sat in my car and I was mortified. And all of a sudden I was like, what the hell were you thinking? What are you doing? You gave up everything.
Mm-hmm.
You're going on 31 years old. You walked away from everything you've ever known. You are a stranger in a massive city. Who the hell do you think you are? What are you doing?
You're Bryan Erwin.
Yeah, well, that's not the answer I got in my head. my head was like, yeah, what am I doing? Oh my God. And I sat there and I watched all these comics. You know, it's like one of those open mics. There's like 40 people on the list, right?
Right.
Everybody doing 3 minutes. And I'm watching them all go in. I was frozen, dude. I couldn't get out of the car.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get out of the car and I was really getting upset. I was like, oh my God, like this is a make or break point. Like I was like, maybe I need to pack up and go back home. Like what am I thinking? This is stupid. You're an idiot. This is a pipe dream. You're a fool. And then all of a sudden I was like, no, you remember when you told everybody that you were leaving?
Mm-hmm.
And you told everybody you were leaving because you wanted to hold yourself accountable for the decisions you made.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Get the fuck out of the car and go do stand up. I just got the hell out of the car, walked in, signed up. I was scared. I never felt more alone in my life
Mm-hmm.
in that moment because I didn't know anybody. But then I met this dude named Aaron Cater, like who was running at the time, and he was so sweet and so nice to me
Mm-hmm.
that it calmed me down. I'm still friends with them to this day.
Mm-hmm.
It calmed me down, and I went up. I don't even know what I did. I probably sucked or whatever. Open mics are so hard, as you know, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like they're not designed to be successful. You know what I mean? It's a popularity contest. So
yeah.
but I did it, and that was and I eventually ended up running that show. Like that it like literally went like everything.
You dominated it.
I try to take it over. Like it's like everything I do, I end up like becoming, up. You know, I
Right.
never. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, that was that.
So how did you get momentum?
We define momentum.
In the sense of, you kept doing it, you did open mics and then started to do more. And then I'm assuming you met John Huck somewhere along the way. Did you meet him in Illinois or did you meet him in LA?
No, he always tells me I met him here in LA, and I always say I don't remember meeting you, which makes me sound like so arrogant. But I apparently met him very early on and don't remember.
Oh,
so
okay.
he and I were a part of the same. There's so many different sub cultures within stand-up.
Yeah.
And everybody has their group that they run with, and there's definitely crossover, but there's everybody's got their places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got their club, everybody's got their clique. That's stand-up in a nutshell.
Right.
But what ended up happening was I ended up I was a door guy at the Comedy and Magic Club in Hermosa Beach, but
Mm-hmm.
that club, you don't get to do stand-up. I was just a door guy, but I wanted to go there because I wanted a master class in stand-up. That's where I saw Carlin. That's where I saw Jerry Seinfeld. That's where I saw Chris Rock. That's where I saw Garry Shandling, which is one of my all-time favorite comedians.
Yeah,
You have to watch Garry Shandling work for a whole week there. And
can you talk a little bit about that? What that was like? I mean,
yeah, Shandling was an interesting guy. Obviously, he was very polite. Because when you also are like I was the parking lot attendant, so a lot of those guys, they pull up, they come in their things, all pleasantries. In short, I didn't get to know any of them very well, but they were all super nice people.
Mm-hmm.
But the Shandling one was where I learned, where I coined my personal phrase, fail forward. And what I mean by that was, so Garry Shandling shows up, and the Comedy Magic Club was interesting because the famous comedians came there all the time. Jay Leno was there every Sunday, but the other comedians, they would do pop-ins, so they wouldn't be on the list.
Mm-hmm.
They would show up as surprises. which is
Right.
amazing for an audience, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, these ridiculously famous people are showing up. And um, so Shandling comes, and I'm like, oh my God, he's one of my, one of the reasons why I do stand up.
Right.
Paul Reiser, Jerry Seinfeld, Garry Shandling, those types of people.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes up on stage, but wadded full of like paper,
Mm-hmm.
notes. Audience goes ballistic. Oh my God, I can't believe it's Jerry Shandling. And for like 5 minutes, they're rolling in their seats. And then all of a sudden, they're not laughing anymore. And like 15, 20 minutes, they're not really laughing. They're kind of like, aha, aha. And I was like, what's going on? Is he not as funny as I thought he was? Like, I was like really confused, right?
Right.
But that happened. He came in on a Tuesday. That happened on Wednesday. That happened on Thursday. And that happened on Friday. Then he came in on Saturday. And he crushed with all the jokes that he had been working on for the last 4 days.
Wow.
And that's when I realized, oh, that's how you write jokes. That's how you develop. He was taking mental notes on stage. What part of this joke is working? What part's not working? Tweak, 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 home run.
That's amazing. That's a fast turnaround.
Yeah, it is. Well, but when you're, let's be honest, Shandling's a genius.
Yeah.
Genius. Comic genius. So I felt so privileged to have had that opportunity in my life that early on, to be able to see that firsthand. That's one of my greatest experiences ever have from in the 21 years that I lived out here, was experiencing that, watching Garry Shandling show me a masterclass in stand-up comedy. Because if you think about it, like, he's Garry Shandling. Like, you and I would worry about failing on stage, but we would classify ourselves as nobodies, right? Now imagine being ridiculously famous and everybody's clinging to every one of your words because they assume that everything you say is hilarious. And when it's not, how disappointed they are when they leave if they don't have the perspective of what I just shared with you.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of comedians, they have this concern if they're, very famous, if they go out on stage, they're getting laughs just because of who they are, not because of their jokes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, it was, that was awesome. So, yeah, I did that. And then I was a door guy at the Comedy Store. And then I started running the belly room at the Comedy Store on Sunset. And that's where I really got my sea legs. That's where my whole world kind of changed. For many years, I was a Comedy Store guy, became an unpaid regular, never became a paid regular. I got kicked out. That's a whole other story in itself.
You get kicked out of a lot of places.
Well, that one wasn't.
That's a theme.
Fault. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, look, that's kind of part of the creative process, though.
Right.
Honestly, in the creative process, a lot of things just run its course. You know what I mean? It's like everybody, when you first get there, yay, we all love each other. And then over time, you kind of got to look at it kind of like a manager of a sports team, right? They can win a championship with you, but then 3 years later, they don't make the playoffs. They're like, get that bum out of here. We're done with you. You're like, no, but don't you remember the good days? Yeah, but that was a couple years ago. So
Right. So, you mentioned that term "fail forward."
Yeah, that's what Garry Shandling basically did, right? It's like he understood that in order to succeed, you had to fail, and you had to fail often, and you can't be afraid of failure. You can't. And especially in this business. God knows, dude, I 21 years, I've been failing miserably for 21 years. And it's all a matter of how you compartmentalize the failures.
Right.
I'm not just talking about creatively. I'm talking about as a husband, as a father, right? As a son, as a comedian, as a coach. Pick a category.
Right.
You're going to fail at some point in all of them.
Yeah.
But what are you getting out of it to build off of? Failing forward.
That kind of reminds me of what you were talking about your mother, how she was saying, and enjoy even those very difficult moments because of those, when you create those wonderful moments.
Yeah,
they're so much better.
Yeah, I mean, you get what you get out of life, right? Whatever it is, and I mean, you've talked openly about your struggles. I mean, so you have to find you have to make a choice, right? You have
Yeah.
to make a conscious choice. How am I going to deal with all this?
Hmm.
And again, I feel like I've been fortunate, and I got to stop. I don't want to be the always look at I don't want to be the glass half empty guy. I got to be careful with that, because I think sometimes a lot of us just fail to recognize how good we have it, and define good, right? Like, why does good have to be, well, I don't have a mansion, well, I don't have 6 cars, well, why am I not as famous as Tom Cruise, or why am I not George Carlin? That's not what I mean. Like,
Right.
that's not what life is anyway. I don't think.
Right. Right. So let's talk a little bit about your comedy evolution. So I know that you talked about starting out as an observational comic.
Yeah.
Where did you go?
Well, so I remember the first time I ever decided to, I finally realized, like, okay, dude, I don't know, so it might have been my old roommate, Tom Clark, who's also a really, really, really great comedian. Tom, he, he and I were talking once, and he finally said to me, he's like, stand-up's interesting in the fact that it's like a muscle. He's like, eventually you know how to write jokes, but not all jokes that you write are right for you. You have to kind of get to the point of, like, finding your voice and crafting your story that you want to tell on stage. Who are you on stage, right? And he was right. And so early on, I'll never forget this. I was in Madison, and I was telling all my yuck jokes, and I was like, well, let's talk about the divorce. And I'll never forget, like, I said something like, so I'm divorced. And this girl in the front row was like, oh, and I was like, oh shit. Like, I totally, like, crumbled and failed, because it was like that. It was too much, too quick, too early, too raw. Like, I
Right.
didn't know how to deal with that type of reaction. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
but I think what happened was, by the time I got out here, and by the time I started developing my material and living a more harsh life, a more lonely life, a more difficult life,
The life of a comedian.
the life of a comedian. Yeah. And especially somebody, a transplant going into a big city where it's, you're going to make friends, you're going to lose friends. Everything happens very, very fast when you make
Yeah.
a big transition like that. Relationships come and go very quickly. You look back on it and you're like, man, it felt like it was years, and it ended up only being like 3 months. It's so weird.
Right.
But ultimately, I still continued to craft my material. But the game changer for me, the real change in my stand-up, did not happen until I got married and had kids.
Hmm.
And then I became more open, because I was at war early on with my first son. Came a little early. Let's just say he wasn't planned, kind of like his dad. Clearly,
Hmm.
my mom was not looking for a seventh kid.
Right.
She got me. Love my kids. Glad I have them.
You are the
But
seventh deadly sin.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well played, sir. Um, yeah, and it's just, and I was at war. I was
Right.
selfish, and I was now officially at war with the life that I had in front of me now, and the life that I wanted.
Hmm.
And so begins my real journey in stand up.
Right.
Well, because then I started really focusing on my life and trying to turn my life into humor,
Hmm.
because I was at war with it. And it's funny, dude, I just recently, during the pandemic, I went through, DV tapes. For those of you at home who don't know what DV tapes are, before MP3s and MV4s and whatever else, there
Right.
would be things called tapes, videotapes, HD videotapes that we used to put everything on. But no, dude, I recorded everything, recorded all my sets.
Oh,
And
really?
I started going through all my old tapes to label them. And
You,
this is
you
gonna
better digitize them or they're going to deteriorate.
that's what I was doing. So
All right.
finally, it's a little bit easier to digitize them now. So that's the next step. First, I wanted to label them all to see what they were. But I'll tell you something
Right.
interesting that I learned after going through 20 years of documenting my life. specifically when it comes to stand up. And to an extent, I listened to some of my old air check tapes and radio.
Mm-hmm.
I was not happy.
Why is that?
I don't know. And I'm really mad at myself. I'm
Okay.
really mad after I didn't, when I was in radio and when I was performing on stage, I think I did not look like I was having a good time. And the thing is, when you look back on your life, I'm mad at myself. I'm mad at myself for not enjoying the journey more.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
it's so short, dude. It's so short. And I was so focused on success of some sort, whether it was radio or stand up, that I think I didn't take the time to truly enjoy the journey. And I think that that would be, if there was one takeaway that I could share with people that are getting into stuff, is don't do that. Take the time to just enjoy it, all of
Yeah.
it. You're not in, no matter how much I thought I was in charge of my destiny, I wasn't.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Like, it's funny, old me, Bryan of the future, is watching Bryan of the past. And if he could yell into that DV tape, he's like, hey, bro, whatever you think you're doing right now, you're not in charge. Whatever you think you're trying to do, and you think that the A to B is going to happen if you behave this way, it's not. That's not how it works. Enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy it. And that was the one big tip. It wasn't that I was doing bad in the comedy, but I know myself. So when I'm watching myself now, I'm like, dude, why? What? What?
Now, when you watch yourself, do you like now, like the more recent stuff, do you see the joy?
No. Because I would say a good 3 or 4 years ago, I took a very long hiatus from stand-up because I wasn't enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know who I was anymore, and I didn't know what I wanted out of life.
So that's when I met you, right?
Yeah. I loved the podcasting. I was doing that because it was from home. Look, you joked earlier about me being a baseball coach and a football coach. I was a dad. I was a 2-time PTA president. I'm a husband. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I do all these things. I'm also a screenwriter. Like, I do all these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But take the screenwriting thing out, I take all the creative out of it. And I really threw myself into being a parent, because I realized that those beautiful children of mine, the most important thing in my life was my wife and my kids and my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to myself, I read Rodney Dangerfield's book.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people just think Rodney Dangerfield was this goofball, this vaudeville kind of goofball comedian that got his start late in life. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
He got his success late in life. But do you know why? Because he quit stand-up to raise his kids and his family. His wife was sick. And that's my story is different. But my point is, he realized what was important in his life at that time, and he was willing to put that stuff on hold to make sure that he took care of his family. And that's what I decided to do. And if I end up getting back into stand up, or end up having any level of success post, awesome. If not, I have no regrets. I'm so glad I've spent as much time, except teaching my kids recently, as we talked about earlier. I'm so glad that I've been able to spend, to do it the way I did with my kids. And that's because good. I realized that I didn't need to be at war with my life.
Right. Well, that's beautiful. Now, I remember you telling me, or I overheard, I don't know what it was, you worked with Louie Anderson. What was that? So
I met Louie through a comedian, Ian Bagg. Ian Bagg, again, another really wonderful, very successful comedian. I used to do a show. He used to do the Ian Bagg show. It was kind of like a talk show back in the early 2000s. And Ian, Louie and his business partner Abraham were producing it, and that's how I met them. And we just kind of hit it off. And Louie and his business partner Abraham started backing some of my independent television projects. and we just became friends on top of it. And we've known each other now, gosh, my it's got to be 17 years, because I didn't have any of my kids yet. So yeah, it's been a long time we've known each other, and he's been nothing. He and Abraham have been nothing but good people to me, and it's been a great relationship. You know, we have yet to get anything off the ground together,
Hmm.
but I will tell you that it makes me feel good to know that someone as successful as Louie Anderson always calls me and tells me how talented he thinks I am, and how much he believes in me. And
Hmm.
that makes me feel good. And I know that's an arrogant thing for me to say, but sometimes you have to, it's okay to accept compliments.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to you like, that's right, dude. That's
Hmm.
right. I am talented and I'm a genius. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that's where his kindness is. He's a mentor, and his kindness has made me feel good about my creative choices
Hmm.
through his support.
That's amazing. So, would you be willing to share there? I remember a story about him at the airport. You were both, I think, in Las Vegas or something like that, and you were at the curbside, and something happened. Are you willing to share that?
Yeah. So he picked me up at the airport. I was flying in to do some stuff, some shows with him, and he picked me up at the airport. And that airport's not that big, so he happened to be, his car was parked right next to where like all the pickup and drop off, that chaos that always happens, right, where everybody kind of
Right.
comes out. And I don't remember why. I don't know if we were waiting for someone else or what, but we were just sitting in the car. And Louis has a very, very distinct voice,
Right.
right? Everybody knows Louie Anderson. I don't do our impressions, but it's kind of, it's a little bit, he's from Minnesota, so there's some nasal like all of us, but
Right.
it's Louie.
Right.
And people kept driving past, and every time somebody parked illegally, he'd stick his head out the window. Hey, you can't park there. And it's always funny, like people like, huh? What? Wait, is Louie Anderson telling me I can't park there? Like just over and over. It was just a short like window of like him just having fun, like messing with people. Because at first I of course was mortified. I'm like, oh Lou, they're gonna hate you. We're gonna get in trouble. He's like, no, they don't. And he's right. He was right. He's like, I
Right.
mean, he's lovable Louie, right? Like
Right.
it's like you can't really get mad at the dude.
Hmm.
He doesn't feel like he's got that mean spirit in him. So it actually became like this little fun.
His presence is de-escalation for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And he's always very quick to like when he's around people, hi, how are you? What's your name?
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Oh, he's always very complimentary.
They
I
should
can
send
learn a
him in
lot.
the conflict zones and let him just be there. And just he'd probably end most conflicts that we have.
Yeah, probably.
So what other projects are going on? What are you working on now?
Well, I was fortunate enough during the pandemic. I had stopped doing the podcast with John.
Hmm.
I needed a kind of a break from doing all that kind of stuff to kind of see where my head was at, and really wanted to focus on family. And as you
Right.
know, not just COVID, but a lot of the world changed drastically in the last year and a half. And being a parent and being someone that's not very cultured and not very well versed in, I'm not a studier, if you will. I'm not a book reader. I'm not a smart guy per se. I'm street savvy, but I'm not that guy. I'm not a book
Mm-hmm.
learner. Um, but I do a desire to be a good person, and I do desire to continue to evolve and learn. And the
Hmm.
reason why is not just for myself, but for my family. And I feel like it's extremely important to make sure that my kids are well versed in what's going on in the world and like that. So I kind of shifted my focus. But while all that was going on and trying to just help them navigate, this COVID world, I was fortunate enough. I was commissioned to write a script, and so myself and my writing partner wrote that script, and then I started working on another script loosely based on my life in elementary school with as a parent.
Hmm.
Started working on that stuff in the meantime, and that's really that's been it. Developing a couple other projects, with Louie.
Hmm.
Um, And this game. I mean, it's a long game.
Yeah.
So you just
Yeah.
keep putting stuff out into the universe and see what happens. I prefer to, at this point in my life, whatever it is, whether it's doing a podcast with you, doing a podcast for myself, writing something, or even shooting something, because I've shot a lot of stuff. I
Mhm.
did direct a couple projects as well, and it's just I only do what I enjoy, because I'm no longer. Remember, I was telling you about watching that guy on the tape and saying, "Enjoy the ride, man.
Yeah.
Why are you trying to? What are you doing?" And so my point is that I've learned how to do what I enjoy,
Right.
so that I don't make that same mistake again. So at the end of the day, if I write 4 scripts and 2 television shows and they never get made, if you were to ask me, are you bummed that you did that and they didn't get made? I would say no, because I enjoyed doing it,
Yeah.
you know?
No, I completely understand that. I mean, when I used to act, my favorite part of the whole process was the rehearsal process, and just because the act of creating in the moment and seeing what happens, and the discovery. So I understand that. Yeah. And that's a wonderful thing to have. Um, one of the things I know that you're into sports, your kids play sports, and I know you have a really wonderful perspective about it, which is important because the American culture is very competitive, and that competitiveness can be very dangerous and destructive. And I think I remember reading one of your Facebook posts about just that kind of friendly competition and how you talked about it. And could you talk a little bit about what sports means to you, and how um, how you to kind of in a sense I feel like it's you use it as a way to teach life lessons.
Yeah, it didn't start that way, to be honest with you. Again, like everything, there's an evolution. And I think when I first, like many parents, but I will specifically talk about myself, when you play sports and then you have kids, all of a sudden you have kids and your kids want to play sports. All of a sudden you anoint yourself the specialist. Like all of a sudden you apparently played the bigs, you played the
Mhm.
pros, and you know everything. And so now you're going to impose your will of knowledge on your children and teach
Mm.
them the right way and make sure that, teach them the structure, all that kind of stuff. So I think my intensity level when I first started coaching both baseball and football was a little bit too much, a
Mhm.
little bit too structured. Because I've learned over time that there's an element of jazz, freeform in everything,
Mhm.
including sports, right? There's structure, but there's freeform. But
Right.
not only that, I started shifting, to realizing again, what is sports? Sports is joy,
Mhm.
right? Not a business, right?
Mhm.
Not my journey, the kids' journey. Joy. What do kids do? They just want to have fun. They want to enjoy themselves. Of course, do they enjoy themselves more when they're better? Yeah. There's a way to explain that to them without it being, this cold, hard business. Like, well, if you don't put in X amount of hours every day, if this
Right.
is not, if you want this, then you got to do it all the time. Vomit, vomit, vomit.
Right.
And
Right.
it's just like the kids are like, or can I just play and have fun? And if I want to get better, can I play a little more? And you kind of have
Right.
to like navigate that. And it took me a little while to get there. And then, past that, I started again. I talked about this with stand up, but it's the same thing with sports. There's a culture there of friendships and bonding that you can get out of this. And that's really important too.
Mm.
Socializing, learning how to socialize. And all of a sudden, I started realizing, oh my God, these kids also can learn how to deal with conflict. These
Mhm.
kids can also learn how to deal with loss,
Mhm.
right? They also learn a lot about themselves. And when things don't go their way, you start learning, what kind of person am I when things aren't going my way? All these little things that I started saying to kids very early on, and they were like, I'm sorry, what is this, Tony Robbins? It's just like, but I was trying to I felt it was really important to encourage them not only to have fun, but to pay attention to what's happening around them. so that they can take it away with them. Because the majority of the kids, if you're a parent in sports, and both of my kids love sports, so they're at a more intense level per se.
Mhm.
But no, we're not even at the most intense level, but we're at an intense level. What you realize very quickly is majority of kids quit sports at the age of 12, 13 max due to burnout,
Mhm.
hatred of their parents because they got pushed too hard, injuries, or just the sheer fact that they just are not interested anymore.
Yeah.
So it's 80%. So that leaves you with a 20% pool from 13 on.
Mhm.
What kind of person are you at age 13, and what's your perspective of sports became really important to me with my kids, because I didn't want my kids to be the ones that when things didn't go their way or they didn't win the championship, the first thing you hear out of them is, I hate you, dad. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I hate you for the way you pushed me because I didn't accomplish my goals. You promised me if I sacrificed everything else in my life, I sacrificed joy, friendships, relationships, going to pizza parties. You promised me that I would get there and I didn't. So now I hate
Yeah.
you. That sounds fun. So it's perspective. It's just giving kids perspective. I allow my kids to both succeed and fail. And I had to learn how to do two things. One, realize that it's not my journey. The hardest thing as a parent is to pull back and let them do what they do,
Yeah.
succeed or fail. They don't need micromanagement. They don't need constant, supervision. And
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Helicopter parents. Yeah.
Helicopter parenting.
Yeah.
And secondly, allow them to develop their own voice as to what they want and be okay with whatever decisions they make, and don't be so hard on them because they didn't make the decisions that you wanted them to.
Right.
That's it. And I think that a lot of people struggle with that, as do I. And I have to continue, because I've been very heavily involved in both of my kids' sporting events because I coach so much.
Mhm.
And I know you're going to find this really hard to believe, but my youngest son was in baseball and I stopped coaching. And then eventually his coach asked me to coach, and I started laughing because I was like, I wasn't even trying anymore. I was like staying out, and I was like, and there it is. And I'm back. But you know what I did this time? I asked my son if he wanted me to coach. And if he had said no, I would
Mhm.
not have been offended. I would have been happy to be a dad sitting in the stands watching my son play.
Yeah.
Win or lose, strike out or home run, right? I would have been happy with that.
Right.
And so like I knew we were in a good place, and he was totally fine with it. And I felt like, okay, maybe I haven't failed him yet, you know?
Right. Right. And so, I mean, obviously, yeah, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And I appreciate you sharing that because, sometimes our culture, sports gets, it gets a little intense and strange. So thank
Well,
you.
I didn't really actually answer, and I forgot to say this in the end, but and I'm sorry to cut you off. Sorry about that.
No, 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 it's okay.
What I was going to say was the most important thing to realize. What I was going back to about the 80% of the kids quit by the age of 12.
Hmm.
That's why the message is so important, because there are things in sports they can carry with them to other things in life, and they may not understand when you're telling them in the moment. They'll understand later. A lot of parenting and a lot of coaching, you don't see the actual final results sometimes for decades, and you have
Yeah.
to be okay with that.
Yeah. 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 I can imagine.
Because it's not all about going to the bigs, man. It's not. It cannot be
Yeah.
about being a pro. It can't even be about going to college, right, and playing successfully.
Right.
Can't be about that. That can't be your end game. If that happens, cool, but that should not be the end game.
Yeah. And that applies to everything, right? And
Everything.
yeah. 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 Enjoying the process. So I apologize. I feel like I may have skipped over your film work and I'm just, I'm fascinated by comedy. I love comedy. And I know your comedy plays into your family life and so on, but is there anything that that you'd like to share in terms of your film work that's memorable that we should hear about?
Well, I think it's still on Amazon Prime. There a movie that I made a couple years ago called Fixed. It was originally called Frozen Peas. It's loosely based on the fact that I got a vasectomy, and I wrote and produced the script with the director Alonzo Mayo, who is a very talented guy. And we kind of like made a farce of like how panicky men get when it comes to getting vasectomies, how much of babies we become.
Right.
And we kind of did a little fun twist and turned the vasectomy into a self-induced midlife crisis kind of thing. Like it's over kind of scenario, because just so you know, for those of you who are not familiar with vasectomies, you are not getting neutered. They're just, everything is fine, you know, but there's this weird thing with men. They think that it's they're basically being neutered, right? They're basically, that's it, you know? And so we made a movie called Fix. Somebody actually just sent me recently. Apparently it is streaming on Paramount Plus as well. I did not know that. I think, I mean, it's been 7 years since it's been out, but you know, I mean, it's a nice little independent film that I was very proud of. And I shot another film called Someone You Know. That's not available anywhere, but that was nice. I won some awards for that one. That was a nice short film, and done some other stuff. But yeah, no, the biggest thing that's out would be Fixed on Prime and Paramount Plus. Past that, the only other thing I did is I used to play with puppets, and you can find all that stuff. Policeman versus Fireman. I had quite a run with that, those puppets back in the early days of YouTube. So
right. Policeman versus Fireman.
Policeman versus Fireman. It's so silly when I look back on it now. Like millions upon millions upon millions of views on those things.
Awesome.
In the early days of YouTube.
Right.
And it was just silliness with puppets that I bought for my kids that they wanted to have nothing to do with.
Wow.
Yeah. Puppets. Who knew?
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. So where do you see yourself going from here?
You know, man, this is going to sound weird because I'm in my 50s. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm at a crossroads, and not a crossroads of a midlife crisis. It's different. I'm at a crossroads of what is life, right? Like, what does life mean to me, and what matters in that life? I know there are certain things, of course, that matter to me. My family, of course, 100%. The most important thing to me is my family. Everything and every decision, no matter what I end up doing, is always going to revolve around what's healthy and what's best for my family. So when I say I don't know, it's like I don't know what my next chapter is. You know, I mean, I don't know what my next act is. I told you earlier, man, I knew what my first act was, my second act. Am I still in my second act, or am I moving to the third act? I don't know yet. Right. And, you know, there are some days I still get excited about making stuff. And then there are other days where I'm excited about coaching. And there's some days where I'm just excited about sitting around the house, hanging out with my family and laughing and watching movies together. And, and trying to not feel guilty about that, because at the end of the day, man, what are we taking with us?
Yeah.
Right.
No, but it says a lot. It says a lot about you, because if you're going from one thing to another, what that tells me is that you're enjoying every step. You know?
Yeah. Like I said, you know, I've had, you know, a couple of my friends are dying to get me to do podcasting again. And I did have fun doing podcasting. Don't get me wrong.
Hollywood Anonymous was great.
Hollywood Anonymous, baby.
Yeah.
And what a great run it was.
And a great premise too.
And, you know, but they're evergreen. They're there forever.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, you know, maybe some podcasting. I don't know. I really don't know. Louie has really been encouraging me to get back into stand-up. I've thought about it. Somebody sent me a snippet of Tom Segura and Christina Pazitsky from Your Mom's House talking about me on their show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but what was interesting about it was because I had sent Tom an old video. I was telling you I was going through all my old videos, and Tom was on there. Tom used to host my show in the Belly Room. And so Tom was showing it the stuff that I had sent him, but I didn't know. I sent it to him and kind of move on in my life. But what was interesting about the snippet that they sent was that the two things that led into it, which I found fascinating, because they have kids now. Their kids are younger, way younger than mine.
Mhm.
But he talked about what he touched on the subject you and I talked about, which was coaching and youth sports. And then he talked about, which I thought was interesting because it kind of, I don't know if it was an intentional or unintentional lead in to showing he and I doing stand up. But he talked about stand up and stand up's journey, about the sacrifices one needs to make in stand up,
Mhm.
and how a lot of people are not willing to make those sacrifices to get to the top of the stand up mountain.
Right.
And he's right, but it was so weird. I was watching, I'm like, is he talking about me? Because he went one direction and I went another direction. But it got me thinking about that. So I don't know. I
So
mean,
what are the sacrifices? Can you name them quickly?
for stand-up,
Yeah.
oh, you got impoverished. It's like being an actor. You have to be impoverished. You have to be willing to drop everything at a moment's notice to do every shit gig that's offered to you.
Right.
And you know, you live your life on the road. You probably live longer with roommates than you want to.
Yeah.
You're probably worried, is my car going to break down on this trip? And if
Yeah.
so, is it going to bankrupt me? Who do I have to borrow money from this week? Where am I going to eat? I mean, those
Yeah.
are legitimate things that stand-ups go through in the process, because there's not a lot of money, man.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in LA to start. As you know, they're showcase sets. You don't get paid for that stuff.
Yeah.
You may get a discount on a beer, or you
Mhm.
may get, you know, some finger food to share with the other comedians. But I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's a barren journey. And I think
Yeah.
I alluded to you earlier in the thing, you know, I think some people would question my journey with respects to stand up, because I did so much more than just stand up. You know, I worked in film production a lot, and
Mhm.
that also was counter to stand up sets and stuff like that, but I made it work, you know,
Mhm.
but I wanted to know everything. I just wanted to know everything. And I don't know if that was the right or wrong thing to do. And quite frankly, I don't even care anymore, you
Right.
know, because at the end of the day, I don't regret doing the things that I did. I used to think like, oh, you idiot, you did it wrong. Did I?
Mhm.
Or did I do it exactly the way I was supposed to? I don't know.
Right. Well, it sounds like and from my opinion, you did it exactly as you were supposed to. It sounds like a great journey. You have a great family, a great life, and I deeply respect you and appreciate. You know, we only met once, but I felt your compassion and your empathy and your kindness, and I appreciate that. And thank you. Um, so, you know, how can people find you if they want to connect with you or see your work?
Well, I live in a basement in Hollywood adjacent. I'm actually surprisingly still, even though I haven't done as much content and as much posting as I used to do on social
Mhm.
media. But if you were to just Google my name, you can find most of my old work on YouTube. Some of it's probably very sad and probably questionable. I don't know. No, but I mean, it's just like, you know, I'm out there. If you just type in Bryan with a Y, Erwin with an E, you'll find all sorts of stuff. Who knows? Maybe there's even some people saying how, you know, what a douchebag I was. And I would probably say, probably was that time. You're probably right. And for that, sir, I apologize, but I cannot turn back the clock.
All right. Well, IMDb, you can find your work.
Yes.
YouTube, Hollywood Anonymous is wherever podcasts are available. Spotify, Apple Podcast.
Yeah. Yep. And there's I mean, it may still be out there. The podcast that I did, if you enjoy parenting, you can learn a lot about me. I did 50 episodes of a show called Dad's Aster, which was a
Okay.
parenting podcast. It was about the failures of fatherhood. There's 50 episodes of that. I don't know if it still exists out there or not. I know that sounds pathetic. I should know exactly where all the things I put out into the universe, but I'm a firm believer in put it out
Mhm.
there it's the universe's now. It's not mine anymore. So whatever became of it, became of it. But
Right.
yeah, you
Are
can
you
find all that.
TikToking?
Hmm?
Are you TikToking?
No. I'm on TikTok because I'm fascinated with all platforms and curious to see, what they're about. I have
Right.
considered from time to time, because I have had a good run of incidental success on most platforms,
Right.
but
Right.
I don't know if I got it in me anymore. That goes to the back to the question you asked earlier about like what's next. I think
Hmm.
everything falls into the I have no idea. I could give you a
Right.
different answer tomorrow, and then I can give you a different answer the day after that. I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing where you're going to go, and I hope that wherever you go, you'll come back here and we can talk again. I really appreciate your time and sharing what is alive within you,
Dude,
Bryan Erwin.
Brian, this was amazing. I gotta be honest with you. I'm not comfortable with spending this much time talking about myself, but I really, you make it very easy. And this was I really, really enjoyed myself. I really did. And you're an awesome dude, man. Um, you know, I wish the best for you as well. And I really, I am in awe on the way you were handling, your life. I really, really genuinely am. And I know that doesn't make up for all the things you'd probably rather have. A kind compliment from Brian is not as good as the things you'd probably rather have. But I am. I mean, I'm really impressed. You're a better man than me for the way you've handled your life. So
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everything. Being on Hollywood Anonymous was really was a great thing at the time, and it helped me kind of awaken myself, and it was part of my journey and part of the process, and I appreciated it. And let's reconnect again.
agreed.
All right, man. All right, everybody. This is the Blind Men in Black. I am your host, Brian Snyder. Once again, please rate, subscribe, do whatever you can. We appreciate it. And thank you so much, Bryan Erwin. Now we're going to have our awkward ending.